then it also leads to a continuous disruption of GDP after those 6 years as well. So this would be similar damage to that wrought by the Great Depression in the 1920s and 30s. However, this Great Depression will be permanent, so that's something which really puts it into stark contrast that this is not really a reversible problem. But we need to adapt as much as we can. So cities, because they account for the majority of global GDP, they will be at the forefront of adapting to climate change, and much of the GDP loss will be in these urban areas. So how can cities be more resilient to these adverse impacts? That's what we'll find out in the next slides. Okay, so the global financing gap is around $5.4 trillion per year, according to the World Bank. But developing cities alone face $1 trillion per year in climate needs, but they have no way to finance these without external help. And we'll see why there are so many constraints to South Asian cities, especially to raising these sorts of resources, which will be important because South Asia will be the most adversely affected area in climate change, as you've already seen in the first session. Can you go back to the picture? Okay, so just to set the scene, so this is a picture from Jaguar last year, and you can see that there we now have ice water stalls. Which usually पहले हम लोग शरबत वाले stalls पे जाते. Now we have ice water stalls in Jacobabad because it has really become uninhabitable in the summer months. So that's the crisis we are already faced with. So the coming years, we need to really get our act together and put our financing needs together. So this is the global climate finance shortfall. I'm not sure if you can see it, but as you can see, there's this big gap from 2021 to 2022, and then it extends further till 2030. And these are our needs in the average scenario, and as you can see, we're not even close to meeting them globally. So this is what we're faced with. So now we can move on to solutions. So I think the first thing to do is to be creative. We need to start thinking of all capital instruments as climate change instruments. So beyond concessional financing, we need to move past the development agencies, start raising our own money, start investing in green bonds, issuing green sukuks. Blended finance would work really well. The Global Innovation Lab for climate finance mobilized $2.5 billion on its own last year. So that's a big achievement for one organization. So I think at the state level, we can achieve a lot of things if we want to adapt to climate change properly. Then we have carbon markets. The IGC is working with Punjab PND and EPD on building an emissions trading system in Pakistan. So, and Punjab will probably be the first province to take the lead in this regard. And then we have insurance and risk transfer mechanisms. We're in a primarily agricultural country. We are facing the brunt of climate change, but we have no insurance mechanisms for crop risk, and there is no pricing of risk in Pakistan, especially for crop insurance. And I think that's going to be a big market going forward. And I think that's going to be an area where international institutions and international finance institutions will also be very interested in building a crop insurance market in Pakistan. Yeah. So these are the key barriers. I mean, we all know these already, that there's essentially a lack of local capacity because this is a new threat really. So there's a lack of local capacity because we are all reacting to this for the first time. And then there are regulatory and policy gaps. We are just now beginning to make the policy infrastructure required for dealing with climate risks. So there will be a lot of steps that the state bank needs to make to ensure that there will be the regulatory and fiscal infrastructure for investing in climate finance. And then, of course, municipal creditworthiness. Our cities barely raise taxes at all. So I think once our local governments become strong enough, then only can we have our cities make all these changes possible. So these are some of the key barriers. And then lastly, let's move on to what we can do as stakeholders. So the first stakeholder, obviously national and local governments will be the key drivers of climate finance. we also have multilateral institutions, but these should not be our like last. This should be a last resort. We need to build our own capacity because our needs are going to be beyond what international finance institutions will be able to provide. And then obviously private sector and investors can catalyze green finance through partnerships. But I think the biggest role that civil society and our communities can play is we can advocate for change, because I think that will be the driving force for governments to uh, make the first move. And I think we should all think about incorporating how climate finance needs into our everyday lives, because we saw what happened in Islamabad uh, a month ago, and who knows what the future holds. So I think we'll just end there, and then Farah can continue the discussion.
Gee, thank you, Zohair. So it seems the challenge is not just designing instruments, but also building financial systems, governance structures. I know we were discussing local capacities earlier as well. So it is now my pleasure to introduce and invite Mr. Ali Tawqir Sheikh, who is a leading expert on climate finance, to offer his reflections and help us frame potential solutions more concretely.
My presentation will build upon three pieces of work I have completed in last 3 years or so. एक तो I'm the principal author of the present NDC, Nationally Determined Contributions. It's a document, good or bad, but it seeks financing. That's not forthcoming. Second is I just reviewed and government has approved the changes in PC 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for their climate proofing. So now it's notified when the PC 1s or new projects are proposed. They'll probably need to reflect adaptation, mitigation, and climate risk related. And that also will generate sufficient data to determine financing needs in particular climate risks such as heat waves, food security, or what have you. And third, and the most recent one, is the National Climate Finance Strategy that I just authored and that was launched in Baku. And that has highlighted the need for not only financial gaps, but also identified 2 or 3 key sources to fill that gap. And the one is domestic resources, taxation in a country where the taxes are already very high, and there's a way of doing this. And second is generating domestic, not just taxes, but also investments from private sector, wherever, to fill that gap. So the present, this presentation is now based on just learning from these 3 recent pieces of work that I did. And this is the outline why I have bothered myself to come all the way from Islamabad to spend some time with you. And I had 3 or 4 key considerations that I wanted to share with you. One is that in my understanding, Pakistan infrastructural deficit is huge and growing. More than 95% of Pakistan's infrastructure is yet to be built. We are very unbuilt or underbuilt city. And it's consuming all the investments that we have or need to have for social sector investments, like education, like health, like water, sanitation, drinking water, and so on. सब पैसे इधर चले जाएंगे because these are very profitable investments. And public sector procurement is a lot easier for infrastructural projects. And climate vulnerabilities are also increasing rapidly. So both things, infrastructural deficit that makes us even more vulnerable, and climate vulnerabilities that leaves us less money to invest on. And financial gap is also increasing. And NFC awards are not sufficient. And they're changing. And foreign loans, we are drowning in debt and we're reaching our limits. And the cost of international finance is becoming prohibitively more expensive for Pakistan. Third, there are many options for us to go. And we have heard about a dozen since this morning. In this presentation, I'll focus only on one, that is municipal bonds. And goal is very simple. if 59-60% of our population is in urban areas, that is right away 100 and what million? At least 20. And if we include another 20% population that lives in peri-urban areas, their livelihoods are connected with cities. There are a very large number of people that we are talking about. And almost half of urban population, because of our sprawls, live in vulnerabilities they don't have access to. So we are talking about roughly about 75 million people who may well be below the poverty line, but at least acutely vulnerable and exposed. And therefore, we need to find a way of turning around our cities, not as hubs of disaster and vulnerability, but engines of actual growth, as we were taught in our schools. So with these three purposes, I have already explained this. ये उसी slide को ज़रा different तरीके से मैंने explain किया. So I don't need to go into too much of detail except the second last bullet. मैंने सुबह रेफर किया था, जहाँ तक मुझे मालूम है पाकिस्तान में किसी लॉ में अर्बन एरियाज आर डिफाइंड नहीं है, उनकी कोई डेफिनेशन नहीं है. और जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल बार है टैक्सेशन के ऊपर वो फेडरल गवर्नमेंट को देती है. प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट के पास और इवन लेस लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स के पास या सिटी गवर्नमेंट्स तो खैर एग्जिस्ट नहीं प्रॉब्ली करती होंगी, उनके पास ऑटोनॉमी नहीं है सब्सटेंशियल रेवेन्यू जनरेशन की. सो देयर इज अ सेंट्रलाइजेशन अ पिरामिड that disempowers local governance institutions at the city level. I leave others aside. So ये जो गैप है फाइनेंशियल ऑटोनॉमी का के बहुत ज़्यादा है, रेवेन्यू जनरेशन की कैपेसिटी बहुत वीक है, और हमारा 3 tier जो सिस्टम है फेडरल, उसके साथ इट्स फर्दर skewed in favor of the federal government. As I mentioned, there are many. I have listed, I hope I'm not skipped a slide, I just want. मैंने उनको 2 हिस्सों में डिवाइड किया, फर्स्ट जनरेशन एंड सेकंड जनरेशन. This is my classification. If you don't like any category on one side, on one side of the slide, you can feel free to change it. But the bottom line here is, even when it is first generation, it may be relatively easy, but still, it's not apple tree that you'll shake and there'll be dollars coming down. It'll be hard. एक बात. दूसरी बात जो पहली है वो म्यूनिसिपल एंड ग्रीन बॉन्ड्स की जो डिस्टिंक्शन है, दैट्स वेरी थिन. बिकॉज ग्रीन बॉन्ड्स की जब तक आपके रेगुलेटर्स ने बहुत स्ट्रिंजेंट किस्म के वाटर टाइट किस्म की गाइडलाइन और रूल्स ना बनाए हों, तो देयर विल बी वेरी लिटिल डिफरेंस बिटवीन green bond and municipal bond, or for that matter, any type of bonds. They're very fancy terms that come for it. And SCCP's regulations or guidelines are pretty weak. Pakistan is not following gold standard international guidelines. And therefore, even if we have green bond guidelines, and all municipal services are essentially non-environmental services. So therefore, we can very well say all municipal bonds can be seen as green bonds or climate-related bonds. Public-private partnership, I think you showed an example, Zahir Sahab, of UK. Pakistan has a pretty weak public-private partnership authority. The one in Sindh is older and more robust than in Punjab. And Sindh has a lot, authority has a lot to show. But it has not gone to the district, to smaller level, and we're talking where our level of analysis is cities. So I'm referring to public-private partnership at the city level. That's where we need the investments. Federal level or provincial level cannot deliver there. And we can discuss that if you want to. And land value capture mechanisms are very important to generate revenue. Those of you, who have the background in economics will understand it quickly. As the land value appreciates, so should the revenue generated by the city government from them. जैसे आपका मेन बुलेवार्ड है या एक एरिया लैंड यूज प्लानिंग की बात कर रहे थे, जब जोनिंग चेंज होती है तो कमर्शियल वैल्यू जब होती है, एप्रिसिएशन होती है, तो दे आर स्टिल पेइंग द प्रीवियस रेट्स एंड दैट द गुड रेवेन्यू. एंड मेनी ऑफ यू नो probably know Mujtaba Paracha. Some of you will know personally. Fascinating book why the urban property is under tax in this country and why the tax collection from urban properties is so low, because it's not in the domain of local government to collect it, comes under the provincial government. So वो बहुत weak कर देता है mechanism को. And as I said, I'll focus on municipal bonds only, and I think there are a few reasons for which I think they offer a solution, not the solution. सिटीज को जब डायरेक्ट कैपिटल एक्सेस मिले कैपिटल मार्केट को, तो आप नेशनल डेट या लाइबिलिटीज में इजाफा नहीं करते, आप किसी और जगह से भी आप जनरेट करने की कोशिश करते हैं. इफ योर फेडरल लेवल इज reaching to the maximum level, it finds it very hard to access international finance. There are 200 cities in Pakistan, and probably a dozen or so, or 2 dozen, are probably poised to get better financing. And then डेट को अवॉइड करने का जो बॉन्ड आपको एक मैकेनिज्म ऑफर करता है वो ये है कि यू इशू बॉन्ड्स फॉर सच सर्विसेज फ्रॉम वेयर you will generate some revenue and your ability to pay back. Just a few years ago, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, Babda launched green bond, 500 million, and the chances were कि ये तो बहुत successful है, हम दोबारा launch करेंगे, triple और करेंगे. But the problem is, उसके साथ उनकी रेवेन्यू स्ट्रीम नहीं बढ़ती, हमारी डेट लायबिलिटी बढ़ती है, क्योंकि उन्होंने अपनी बैलेंस शीट के अगेंस्ट बॉन्ड को जनरेट किया इंस्टेड ऑफ अ रेवेन्यू. अगर होता मेरा फ्रंट डैम कंप्लीट हो जाएगा, वहाँ से मेरी वाटर प्राइसिंग आएगी, वाटर बिलिंग के साथ ये मेरा रेवेन्यू आएगा, एंड माई एबिलिटी टू पे बैक विल बी इनहांस्ड. दैट वुड हैव बीन अ वेरी हेल्दी बॉन्ड. इट वाज 7% to 30-31 if I'm not mistaken. That's an extremely costly. यहाँ पे जो चीज़ मैं कह रहा हूँ कि वो रेवेन्यू स्ट्रीम जनरेट करता हो. Any municipal service for which the cost recovery is on the card and will recover from the users, then it can be a very successful one. I'll just move to next slide, and you may have seen.
We can take questions at the end.
Just give me a few minutes. I'll finish in 3. Thank you. Okay, I'll not review each line. You can look at them whatever you like. I'll just pick 1 or 2 items from there. Easiest for a country like Pakistan source is property tax, because we are already around 50% or 60% in Lahore and Karachi. In a good city where you want to issue bonds, have to be 80 or 90%. The gap is much smaller. We are closer to success there. Public-private partnership structures for revenue generation can cover many areas, such as wastewater, water conservation, such as air pollution. I'll explain air pollution again. And it can be for a small infrastructure project or a very big one. You need to have a bypass or a ring road or any water-related scheme in a particular area. So you don't have to think of billions, you can think of millions. Last bullet is very important in my view. Accessing international climate finance only as equity, meaning by $100, $200, $500 million project is for something else, but you're seeking a small percentage of an equity in your bond. That gives you credibility and legitimacy. Maybe GCF project or a World Bank project deals with water management, and you're saying only give me 5 or 10% as your equity in my bond, and that gives you credibility and access to relatively cheaper finance. Now, I want to share 2 examples with you primarily. Ahmedabad, the enemy country, who may attack us before I finish my speech. Bangladesh, an example from Bangladesh. And Pakistan, तीनों का जो legal laws हैं, dealing with city governance are the same. Similar kind of accounting system, similar kind of administrative structures in the cities. बांग्लादेश ने काफ़ी कोशिश की bonds launch करने की, but it did not take any reforms in the structure and system, financial systems of the city. It failed repeatedly. 3, 4, 5 efforts it made, it failed. And recently, 2 years ago, it has offered a Sukuk. That's a different category than municipal bonds. On the other hand, Ahmedabad started the first non-sovereign guaranteed bond in 1998. I cannot guess who was the chief minister in Gujarat, Ahmedabad at that time. But I think anybody sitting in this room can guess who was the chief minister in this Punjab. So it tells you 98 to 25 years or more, we have missed the bus, an example from a neighboring country. When we were building bypasses, they were looking at restructuring cities. और उन्होंने लॉन्च किया था 20-25 मिलियन डॉलर का बॉन्ड, विच एट द टाइम वाज अ वेरी लार्ज सम. और उन्होंने कुछ रिफॉर्म्स की थी जो मैं भी आपके साथ शेयर करता हूँ. मेरे ख्याल में वो रिफॉर्म्स आर द प्रीकर्सर फॉर सक्सेस इन पाकिस्तान. फॉर एग्जांपल, उन्होंने अपने प्रॉपर्टी के टैक्स को 55% जो आजकल लाहौर का है उसको उठा के 85% पे ले गए थे. दे जनरेटेड मोर रेवेन्यू दैट एडेड टू देयर पे बैक एबिलिटी. Result, 25 years later, more than 20 cities in India are replicating the success story from Ahmedabad. So if you do it in city X in Punjab, chances are that now other cities will not need to wait 20 years like it happened in India. In our case, we can fast track in 5-7 years. Several other cities can come in. और जो recent वहाँ पे launching हुई है 2 bonds की, वो 4 to 6 times higher उनको offerings आई हैं. It has become so popular and उन्होंने green bond भी launch किए हैं recently. और उन्होंने हर किस्म की चीज़ के ऊपर bonds launch किए हैं. और एग्जैक्टली वही जो सिटी को अपना इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर चाहिए जो होता है, जो एजुकेशन और हेल्थ वगैरह के पैसे खा जाता है, उन्हीं चीज़ों को उन्होंने इधर से कवर किया. द लास्ट वन वाज इन गाजियाबाद, जिसकी 6 टाइम्स ऑफरिंग आई. बहुत ज़्यादा सिग्निफिकेंट नहीं है. आई वॉन्ट टू गिव यू माई फेवरेट एग्जाम्पल इज फ्रॉम बैंकॉक. केप टाउन भी है, जोहानिसबर्ग भी है, इंडोनेशिया में जावा आइलैंड भी है. देयर आर मेनी वेरी नाइस एग्जांपल्स, बट लेट्स सी इफ आई कैन शेयर एग्जांपल. लेट्स से डिफरेंट प्रिंट आउट. why I'm saying Bangkok. I noticed this morning, I grew up in Lahore, but I'm not so passionate about the air pollution issue here. The way I saw everybody was so charged here. Very emotional. और database की भी बात हुई, but I want to please allow me to backtrack just for a moment. I'll come back to this point. Data की climate language में बहुत ज़्यादा value है if you have the baseline before you start doing something. For example, if Pakistan launched 10 billion tree project under Imran Khan and we did not have the baseline, we cannot get carbon credits for that. But if you establish the baseline beforehand, then you can get the carbon credit. Likewise, air pollution Lahore की बहुत high है. If you establish a credible gold standard baseline, then you can get carbon credit also. Otherwise, you'll invest your own money and globally you'll not get any credits. This Bangkok, what they did, they established their baseline and then now they are trading air pollution as carbon credit. And the green bond was $115 million at that time. And they are in the process of transforming the entire fleet system to solarized system. And these are not imported solarized buses that are charged on fossil fuel terminals. And there's a full life cycle to this. So in other words, the example from Bangkok, because you're talking about air pollution in the city, if you have a baseline, and if you have good institutions such as yours supporting the government, working closely with government, you can think of credits and you think of green bonds in the air pollution areas than having to look for loans. ये स्लाइड अगर मुझे सिर्फ एक स्लाइड दिखानी हो तो मैं आपको सिर्फ ये दिखाऊं, चूंकि आप सब स्कॉलर्स हैं, फास्ट रीडिंग कर सकते हैं, मैं तो इसको नहीं पढ़ सकूंगा, मगर इसमें मैं आपको सिर्फ ये बतलाना चाहता हूं कि अगर पाकिस्तान बॉन्ड इशू करना चाहे तो जो अहमदाबाद ने किया था, यहाँ पे वो सारी मेजर चीज़ें सारी लिस्टेड हैं, वो चीज़ें हमें पहले करनी पड़ेंगी, उसके बगैर वी विल नॉट बी एबल टू, इट्स नॉट एन एप्पल ट्री दैट विल शेक एंड you'll get डॉलर्स. क्या क्या चीज़ें हैं? पहला ये है कि उन्होंने अकाउंटिंग सिस्टम चेंज किया, उनका भी हमारी तरह कैश बेस था, उन्होंने एक्रूअल बेस पे किया, वेरी सिंपल, जिसके लिए ज़रूरी है कि अपने सिटी गवर्नमेंट में आप एक ट्रेजरी डिपार्टमेंट या बजट का डिपार्टमेंट बनाएं, वो बनाएंगे तो फिर ही आप अपनी बुक्स को हैंडल कर सकेंगे. एंड another thing they did, a city has to be run like a private sector company, like you run probably LUMS. It has a balance sheet, a profit and loss statement. If you don't have a profit and loss statement, you will not know you're going in red or not. Then you look for subsidies and grants and all that. But once you have a balance sheet, then a rating agency can do your evaluation and give you a rating. Ahmedabad did that, developed their balance sheet and many other things, and they got AA plus rating. Once you get this rating, you become investment ready. Some people will come and say, I'm willing to invest because my risks are not very high. And that rating is also very important for transparency and financial health. Investor confidence भी चाहिए होता है. जो रेवेन्यू की लीकेज होते हैं वो कंट्रोल होते हैं. आई डोंट हैव मच टाइम टू गेट इनटू डिटेल. यहाँ पे सामने कोई खाली प्लॉट हो, पार्क हो, कोई चीज़ हो, तो योर गवर्नमेंट कैन एलोकेट और सेल इट टू एनीवन. अब दूंगी ग्राउंड को, आप कहते हैं मैं इसको फला पर्पज़ के लिए यूज़ कर लेता हूँ, वाटर स्टोरेज के लिए, और आप कहते हैं मैं स्कूल बना लेता हूँ. यू यूज़ डिस्क्रिशनरी पावर फॉर यूज़ और अब्यूज़. तो जब आपने उसको बैलेंस शीट में शो कर दिया है एज एन एसेट, उसकी वैल्यू डिटरमिन कर दी है, तो देन इट बिकम्स मच हार्डर टू टच दैट. So, in other words, those of you who are interested to follow this thing, Ahmedabad case study, there's a lot of literature probably you can find, and I hope this slide you can access because it gives you highlights of some of the most important things they did, which in my view are important for Pakistan to follow if you want to do it. अच्छा, अब मैं पब्लिक पॉलिसी पर्सपेक्टिव के साथ चीज़ों को देखने की कोशिश की ताकि आई वाज गिवन टू अंडरस्टैंड कि जी ये इश्यूज हैं. So we'll need to change our financial system in the city. We'll need to generate certain amount of revenue that we don't. And then we need to change legal frameworks, provincial legislation to enable you to do that. And many other things that will need to be done in this domain that we have not done so far. Some are very difficult things to do. Some of them are very difficult things to do. Before I come to the right side of the table, please allow me to mention 3 impossible things for us to do. Unless वो आप करेंगे नहीं, आप आगे नहीं चल सकते. And political environment may not be ready for it. I saw this morning also. पहला तो आपको डिसेंट्रलाइज करनी होगी fiscal authority. And that will require a constitutional amendment. And that will not happen unless you have enough numbers in the parliament. And ordinance के साथ ये काम नहीं होगा because it's a long haul. It's an impossible thing to do, but unless we cross that bridge, we cannot go very far. Building financial capacity in the city government, whatever that is, city administration आप कह लीजिए, is absolutely critical. Federal government will not do it. Urban unit cannot deliver it. LUMS cannot substitute it, either one of them. So it's not a question of your competence, it is a question of your legitimacy. You have to be sitting there. And by the way, just by way of example, because I've worked on it, each office will need about 25, 30 professionally trained people like some sitting here. And if 10-20 years horizon रख के अगर आप देखें, they are looking at 300-400 economists who will have jobs, high-paying jobs in cities, and fit for international transfers and postings. तो आपने अपने कंट्री की अगर एब्जॉर्प्टिव कैपेसिटी बनानी है, फाइनेंशियल अट्रैक्ट करने की, स्पेंड करने की, उनको मैनेज करने की, इनको ऑडिट करने की, उनके ऊपर प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी करने के लिए, तो वील हैव टू गो बियॉन्ड लिटिल मिनिस्ट्रीज दैट वी हैव, जब वहाँ पे 2 इकोनॉमिस्ट भी आपको नहीं मिलते, टू गो टू दोज लेवल्स वेयर वी नीड ऑपरेशनल. एंड थर्ड, हमारे यहाँ फैशन है कि थिंक अ वेरी बिग $100 million प्रोजेक्ट 5 to 10 million के साथ समझते हैं कि ये तो बड़ी गरीबों वाली बात है. हम की बात करें, हम तो न्यूक्लियर पावर, राइट. बट स्मॉलर प्रोजेक्ट विल हैव 2 advantages. वन एडवांटेज इज आपकी रेवेन्यू स्ट्रीम के साथ मैच करेगा. अगर आपने वाटर के बिल के साथ करना है, बिजली के बिल के साथ करना है, किसी और चीज़ के साथ करना है, तो योर एबिलिटी टू नॉट गेट टू पे रेगुलरली will improve. And second is आपका confidence बढ़ जाएगा larger project के लिए. I want to come to the right side. वो इसलिए कि जहाँ कहीं भी मैंने पढ़ा, हर किसी ने कराची और लाहौर की एग्जाम्पल्स दी कि maybe municipal bonds can be done here. And 2008 और 9 में पंजाब गवर्नमेंट ने कोशिश भी की थी, and then they shelved because they found it very hard. जो मैंने कहा था ना, impossible to do things. कौन start करे? My submission here is the opposite of what the literature says. Go to a smaller city. I wish I could think of a smaller city than Sialkot and Faisalabad. And the reason I'm proposing here, I hope I have written Sialkot and Faisalabad. The reason is the private sector here is extremely robust and dynamic. The city's ability to generate revenue is huge. And their ability to connect with institutional is much stronger than Budewala and Saibab or Hyderabad or Peshawar. And yeah, that's really and the ability to align with global trade is very high of both these two cities. And their ability to create jobs is very high. Human resource skill set there is already very high compared to other cities that I mentioned. And जो इंटरनेशनल क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस की लेक्सिकन या लैंग्वेज है, such as Paris Agreement or SDGs or Shanghai Framework or things of the sort, or CBAMs, जो यूरोपियन के आ रहे हैं, they are very well attuned to all those. So, Lahore किस्म के cities get very politicized, or Karachi for that matter, because their provincial government is breathing on their neck all the time, and the failure comes not from your work, but from the government in power. वो किसी का CV लेकर आ जाएंगे, किसी की ट्रांसफर पोस्टिंग कर देंगे. So you can be on one side and spend a few years, 2-3 years, and then you can have, and that's my submission for us to go. In order to conclude, let's not think of 100 million. We're not fit for it. We're not fit for swimming in deep waters. Let's learn to swim in shallow waters. And I say it with all humility. This campus started in Gulberg in rented houses. You begin small, measured steps के साथ चाहिए. And मैंने उसको arbitrarily 3 phases में जो रखा है. और 3 phases में रखते हुए एक assumption है जिसका मैं एंड पे जिक्र करता हूँ, मगर पहली phase 1-2 साल में हो सकती है reforms की. Somebody praised your senior minister that she is very sensitized. Maybe your CM is also very sensitized. Maybe they can champion this and give the necessary support for reforms that will need to ignite the process. और जो उसकी प्री कंडीशन है वो एक इकोसिस्टम का होना है. मैं इकोसिस्टम की बात को एक्सप्लेन करना चाहता हूँ. Those of you who are working with IGC or CPDR, Ijaz Nabi was mentioning this thing कि हमारे पास रिसर्च की कैपेसिटी तो बहुत है, राइट, मगर समथिंग ही डिडंट से, मगर इकोसिस्टम नहीं है. यहाँ पे कुछ साहब बैठे हुए थे कह रहे थे जी मैम लम्स में सिटी है, यहाँ पे बैठे हुए थे कहते जी मैं तो लिविंग के लिए करता हूँ मगर हम लोगों को नहीं बतलाते. उमर they do similar work but they don't talk to each other, and there will be half a dozen other institutions who are doing this. ये सिलिकॉन वैली वाला इकोसिस्टम था. And I think Lahore, compared to Sindh, is much more blessed in terms of having their own ecosystem. 3, 4 premier universities producing almost world class, maybe some world class economists who can engage in this kind of conversation. अक्सर लोगों के पेरेंट्स बूढ़े हैं और लाहौर छोड़ के नहीं जा सकते. जितना इकोनॉमिस्ट शहर के हैं उनको मैं जानता हूँ. So they are here. They are not going to go anytime soon to some other city. So you have all the markings of creating a critical mass. It cannot be initiated with concessional loan or idea from the World Bank. They'll take 4 years to mature. Urban unit cannot do it. It's struggling constantly. I've seen for the last 20 years with own legitimacy and acceptance. LUMS has all the competencies and the network of universities, but it's connecting the dots. The very first point I've written here is building an institutional ecosystem spearhead. It will require a champion. It will not happen only because the data says so. And then, of course, I've already mentioned financial system overhaul and increasing revenue and market level की entry के लिए, which is phase 2. It's absolutely critical कि जी initiate bond first generation with some guarantees, because our credibility in the marketplace is very limited, and that guarantee has to come from somewhere. And if it is Sialkot or Faisalabad type of city, that guarantee doesn't need to be sovereign. It will come from their associations or bigger business houses. And I think I thought of relatively smaller project for them, and there is a reason for it. Averages of smaller projects from India I picked, and I used those figures here from 7 to 10 and 11 to whatever 18 million, and then begin scaling up. And scaling up can take us to 1 billion or more, but it will require 4 or 5 years, and we are not quite there. But my cynicism says the moment the figure is less than 6 digits, the government will begin to yawn and say कि आपको हमारी tight fiscal space का नहीं पता. They want bigger money, and therefore they'll not have the patience for it. So what are some of the small initiative steps? I have listed 5. You can pick your important ones. Regarding financial autonomy, that's the first stumbling block. This is Article 140A in the Constitution that has centralized power in the federal government. Under the IMF pressures, now NFC award is being revised, and the provincial functions that the federal government was paying, now the money is coming to the provinces. So some provinces like Punjab are in surplus for now. So there's a good opportunity for them. An important issue on that IGC can play an important role is defining the cities. Defining it much easier, but creating an environment where the draft is accepted and legislated, that is important. And unless we define the city, no bonds can be issued. Standardization of accounting system is absolutely important. Provinces and cities so far follow different definitions. And for me, even though my primary interest is in climate change, if we transform urban governance, the key advantage of preparing for bonds, even if it's $5 million or $10 million or something, is that it transforms the urban governance. It will create many more jobs than we can envision. Or our universities are geared or prepared to provide us. Human capital will be needed, it will be in greater demand. If we succeed in 1 or 2 cities, we can replicate in many provinces and many other cities. And hopefully it also results in improved environmental municipal services. People get to service them, they pay for. And there's a willingness to pay and there's an ability to pay that needs to be capitalized and we are not oftentimes done. And most importantly, from my point of view, it helps us increase climate resilience and reduce our vulnerability, which typically affects women and people on the fronts, that are children and the elderly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So I was wondering how you generate a credible revenue streams. And so you said basically it should be linked to the citizens. But I do want to ask, because in a lot of the solutions that you've proposed, it's difficult to de-link the political economy, and you hinted at that. And I wondered from your experience if you think that's possible at this stage. You talked about a champion. Does such a champion exist? And if not, where should we look for such a champion? Sorry. Yeah.
वही champion वाली बात है.
We can also, if you have other questions, we can take a round of questions and then we can resume. So, Ji, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ali Tokir sir. Very enlightening presentation. While looking at the example you have quoted in your presentation, especially Ahmedabad and Bangkok, so we need to look at the how part, how they were able to do all that. Did they have a will to do it? Or they, gone into reforming their institutional design, or was there a public push, or they did it on saying of World Bank or any donor agency, or maybe Elon Musk in these days are pushing many things on global front. So what were the incentive for them to do that? The second part is, you also live in Islamabad. While looking at CDA, I have assisted Dr. Nadeem a couple of years ago conducting a study on the CDA's revenue potential. We were surprised to see their, budget is around, the amount they budget annually is around 40 billion. They have 32,000 employees and they hardly generate 6 or 7 billion rupees, their OSR, own source revenue. And we presented all these potential, how can they generate more revenue? And they were not willing to do it. While having an authoritative model of governance in cities, when money comes down from the federal government or the provincial government, how can we make our city institutions to go for such incentives or initiatives? Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Ali Saab, for an enlightening presentation, and thank you, Zohid Saab. I have a couple of questions regarding these. One thing I want to know about the green bonds. Let's say you talked about issuing of green bonds. What I issued the euro bonds. Those euro bonds, they had the problems that you already mentioned, and still those bonds were oversubscribed by 4 times. There was the international investors were willing to invest almost 2 to 3 billion. It was a $500 million project, and they were willing to invest 2 to 3 billion in that project. Even though in Pakistan there are no benefits involved, there are no tax exemptions, there are no withholding exemptions, anything that the government can provide. Even internationally, there are benefits for issuing green bonds, and that what attract a lot of investors. So I believe that this is one of an avenue that can be used for obtaining the international investments or private investment. There's a report by Standard Chartered that there's a potential of $96.2 billion in Pakistan in private investment, and that can be tapped through these initiatives with bankable projects, because in Pakistan the problem is there are no bankable projects. The government they only provide subsidies and they short-term problems, and that's like that. Another thing I want to know is that you mentioned that there are if you change the government financial mechanism from cash basis to accrual basis of accounting. Well, as you know, quite recently, Pakistan revamped their accounting system, the PIFRA project, and through PIFRA they implemented SAP, and with SAP they streamlined a lot of overall government financing. And it was a huge project, a lot of resources, a lot of years, and still the government is struggling to cope up with that. And changing it again using an accrual-based accounting system, there is the risk that everything might collapse because it's a huge revamp in the system. Why do you think that revamp would be beneficial? If you just say, we say the value it could generate, it could generate just to attract more investors, just to get a rating like factor rating, like overall rating. So that's I want to elaborate on that. Thirdly, I want to know about the government have recently started their initiative on carbon markets. The federal government issued a carbon policy, but still there is no carbon pricing policy. There is no carbon registry policy. There are a lot of things that are lacking, and there is no provincial in or Punjab, because it's a devolved subject. So Punjab has not taken any initiative on that. So what do you think this can help our overall climate financing? Thank you.
Let me give it a try. Let me begin with your last point on carbon trading, because जुबैर साहब ने जो लिस्ट शो की थी उसमें कार्बन ट्रेडिंग बड़ी आम थी, आई नोटिस दैट। वैसे भी बहुत ज़्यादा आजकल उसका चर्चा होता है। प्राइम मिनिस्टर कॉन्स्टिट्यूटेड अ कमेटी. I was the chair of that committee that developed the guidelines. Prime Minister constituted a committee. I was chairing that to develop the guidelines. The guidelines were initially developed by some consultants. When they went to the Climate Change Council, the council did not approve them, and they asked for revisions, and I was assigned to revise them. And I looked at it a little bit more closely, and then with minor changes जो मैंने edit करके दिया था, I can share a little bit with you. The infrastructure that we need for carbon trading is not there. It's as simple as that. Be it regulated market or unregulated market. जो आपको उसकी बेसलाइन चाहिए है एमिशंस की लेवल्स की, सेक्टर्स की, प्रोविंसेस की या सिटीज की, हमारे यहाँ है ही नहीं. तो रिजल्ट विल बी नॉन ट्रांसपेरेंट ट्रांजैक्शंस as we had one on mangroves in Karachi. That transaction may have given us $10-20 million, but we seem to have lost more than 2/3 of our mangroves to private sector parties, and we don't even know their names. And that transaction happened even when there were no policy guidelines and there was no pricing. आज तो फिर guidelines है ना, उस वक्त guidelines भी नहीं थी. In my humble view, Pakistan is not quite ready for it. And there are at least 3 stumbling blocks we need to cross those. And they are almost as difficult as the constitutional amendment that I mentioned. The first, if carbon is to be traded, it is an asset. We need to know whose asset is that. Is it a provincial asset or a federal government asset? Some governments, such as the provincial government, says it is our asset. Federal government has no right to sell it. And particularly after the 18th Amendment, this is an issue that we have not resolved. We haven't hashed it. That's one issue. Second, the baseline is maintained by the federal government through GCISC, a climate change ministry's research arm. Whereas the provincial government, such as your Punjab government, say we need to develop our own database. And you will recall that we talked about this, and this conversation has been going on for some time. Provinces and want to develop their own database so that there could be a transaction. It doesn't exist so far. Third, in the present environment, the market prices have collapsed for the informal sector. Irregular, क्या उसे कहते हैं, unregulated sector, and they have collapsed. And because of Donald Trump's anti-climate whatever policies, even the regulatory market, carbon market and the price are down. Forget about next 3-4 years. Number one, you will not have these three things sorted out. Number two, you will not have good prices to attract, and it will be chasing shadows. So that question I wanted to put firmly behind me before I get to relatively easier issues to deal with. ये सिर्फ रिफॉर्म से अपने आप को अवॉइड करने के लिए वी आर चेजिंग शेडोज हियर एंड देयर कि अच्छा जी अब ये कर लेते हैं. आई वांट टू कम टू more serious issues that are. There are many ways to increase revenue. That was your first question. And I gave example, the easiest for now for cities like Lahore is the property. Because city is already generated 50% of property value. Even though recovery is very bad, the reason is कि वो प्रॉपर्टी इधर कलेक्ट प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट करती है, उसको इंसेंटिव नहीं है, इधर से रिश्वत लेकर चुप हो जाता है, तो इट नीड टू बी स्ट्रीमलाइंड अ लिटिल बिट, बट दैट्स अ लॉट ईजियर. एंड दैट इज almost 30% increase from 50 to 80%. And that's very substantial because this is the biggest chunk. Then the other unutilized resources. And one important unutilized resource is जब आपके zoning laws change होते हैं, जगह की एप्रिसिएशन होती है, जब सिटी या टैक्स पेयर के पैसे के साथ उस एरिया को इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर मिलता है, सीवरेज की पाइप, पानी की पाइप्स और टेलीफोन लाइंस एंड सो एंड सो फोर्थ, उसकी एप्रिसिएशन बनती है और वो एप्रिशिएटेड के ऊपर गवर्नमेंट को या सिटी को वापस रेवेन्यू नहीं मिलता. अगर आप सिटी लाहौर सिटी का ऑडिट करें तो यू आर ऑलमोस्ट 80% अंडर वैल्यूड इन योर कलेक्शन, एंड दैट्स ओनली अ प्रोसीजरल थिंग फॉर द गवर्नमेंट, फॉर द लोकल गवर्नमेंट टू डू इट. यू डोंट नीड डोनर मनीज फॉर दैट. आप सिर्फ ये बुलेवार्ड के एग्जांपल ले लीजिए. We all know DC rate and LDA rate and property dealer rate. This is all black money that we have created, and that's a very large sum. So, ma'am, revenue can be increased. And I don't know लाहौर शहर में पानी की प्राइस आप पे करते हैं कि नहीं, आपको मंथली बिल आते हैं कि नहीं आते. I really don't know. और मुझे नहीं पता कॉस्ट रिकवरी बेसिस पे है कि नॉर्मल रिकवरी है. मुझे ये भी नहीं पता कि उसको ऑडिट भी करते हैं कि बस वो फ्लैट रेट प्रिंट करते जा रहे हैं फॉर लास्ट सेवरल ईयर्स. देयर मे बी मेनी मेनी क्वेश्चंस. पेशावर में आई वाज पार्ट ऑफ अ प्रोजेक्ट, वो एआई को डिप्लॉय कर रहे थे कि जब सेक्टर्स में पानी जाता है तो एआई डेटा मुझे बतलाता है कि ये डिफेंस का जो भी सेक्टर है इससे मुझे इतना रेवेन्यू आना चाहिए. एनीवेज, रेवेन्यू कैन बी इंक्रीज्ड, एंड मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट थिंग इज कि जब कॉस्ट रिकवरी को प्रिंसिपल बना रहे हैं, खा वो कैनाल वाटर हो या म्यूनसिपल सर्विसेज हो, तो देन गवर्नमेंट जो रेड में है वो ज़रा कंट्रोल में होना शुरू होता है. डिफिकल्ट क्वेश्चन इज हु विल डू इट. I wish Ijaz Nabi was sitting there. Believe me, I would have said, if he cannot do it, nobody can do it. He enjoys more clout in Lahore than your chief ministers, right? He may not be very influential in a number of things, but at least people regard and respect him, and they know that if he is championing a cause, he is not doing for personal gain. Okay? So, there are eminent people outside the government who can champion it. Government cannot champion it. The moment somebody from the government will try to champion it, उसको ट्रांसफर कर देंगे, उसकी रिटायरमेंट का टाइम आ जाएगा, उसको पेनलाइज कर देंगे. बट देन देयर इज अ डिफरेंस बिटवीन, आपने इंसेंटिव्स वाली बात की थी, एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप एंड लीडरशिप. आई स्पेंड गुड पार्ट ऑफ माई लाइफ ऑन लीडरशिप, only to find that for an enterprise like this, you need to incentivize people and provide opportunities for them to grow rich and have opportunities. So we need to figure out where are the different ways that you can bring the entrepreneurship in. मुझे खाली प्लॉट दे दे, मैं पार्किंग प्लाजा बना के ज़्यादा पैसे बना लूँगा than being a vice chancellor of this university. So is the city government willing or empowered to provide such opportunities to younger people to do that? Apps के साथ लोग पैसे बनाते हैं. Just one more question, then I'll come to this.
कार्बन ट्रेडिंग की बात कर रहे थे
जी जी जी.
अभी हम पहले डिस्कस कर रहे थे. सो कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर का थोड़ा सा मैं पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू आपको बता देता हूँ. आई हैव वर्कड इन सैफायर, यूएस ग्रुप, निज़ाम, एंड नाउ आई एम वर्किंग इन फास्ट केबल्स. दे हैव सब्सक्राइब्ड मोस्ट ऑफ द पोर्टल्स जो कि एक्सपोर्ट के लिए जाते हैं. CSDD की बात करें, CSRD की बात कर लें, डिजिटल प्रोडक्ट पासपोर्ट की बात करें, और उनकी सब्सक्रिप्शन फीस बहुत ज़्यादा है, लाइक $10,000 है, $12,000 है. अगर हम स्पेसिफिकली कार्बन ट्रेडिंग की बात करें तो इसकी मार्केट बहुत अनसर्टेन है. कभी 35.14 पे आपका एक क्रेडिट फॉल कर रहा होता है तो वो अगले दिन 14.1 पे आ जाता है डॉलर्स पे, ठीक है। सो इसीलिए वो वेरा या गोल्ड की सर्टिफिकेशन नहीं करवाते, वैलिडेशन नहीं करवाते, पैरेलल में वो एसबीटीआई के ऊपर अपने कार्बन जो अपनी इमिशंस है वो वैलिडेट करवा रहे हैं। सो एक दफ़ा पहले भी एसडीपीआई की कॉन्फ्रेंस थी, उसमें भी मैंने ये सवाल किया था कि जो गवर्नमेंट की पॉलिसी है उसमें ये एक छोटा सा पार्ट है वो मिसिंग है, जिसपे वो कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर को कार्बन क्रेडिट का एक रेट फिक्स कर दे, ठीक है, जिसपे उसने सेल करना है। फॉर इंस्टेंस 35.14 पे अगर सेल होना है तो वो 35.14 पे उसको सर्टेनिटी हो कि मेरे क्रेडिट्स ये बिकेंगे। सैफायर के 1 लाख क्रेडिट्स अभी तक पेंडिंग पड़े हुए हैं, जस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ उसको लेने वाला कोई नहीं है, एक तो विंड मिल्स के, दूसरा वो कभी 35 से 14 पे आ जाता है, आजकल 9.14 पे आया हुआ डॉलर्स पे, ठीक है। सो ये एक पॉइंट था मेरा कि जो गवर्नमेंट की पॉलिसी के अंदर एक मार्केट की सर्टेनिटी को इंश्योर किया जाए, देन कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर जो है वो लाइक इट विल बी विलिंग टू contribute into the carbon trading system.
Maybe not 7 but twice as much. जहाँ तक मुझे पता है, it was at 7% interest rate for $500 million. Maturity is 2031.
It has a tenure of 10 years.
2031 में बनता है 10 years
Yes.
कि नहीं?
2021 में इशू हुआ था, yes.
हाँ, तो 31 में बनेगा ना, and it was in dollar terms at 7%. So given the depreciation of rupee, the actual return rate may be twice as much for Pakistan. Problem with this is Pakistan was in very tight financial space, and some countries wanted to keep us afloat and encourage us and fast tracked it, and there were 4 times coming. It was just like IPPs. Problem was the following: it was against the balance sheet. The guarantees were against WAPDA's balance sheet. It was not against a revenue stream कि जी ये मेरा डैम कंप्लीट हो जाएगा, उससे रेवेन्यू जनरेट होगा। द सिटी बॉन्ड्स में मैं आपको रिक्वेस्ट कर रहा हूँ कि लर्निंग फ्रॉम वापडाज केस, यहाँ पे हम सिर्फ उसी चीज़ का बनाए और छोटे छोटे बनाए जिसमें हमारी रेवेन्यू स्ट्रीम बन रही हो। हम जैसे ही आपकी पे बैक करने की एबिलिटी डेमोन्स्ट्रेट हो जाती है 2-1 प्रोजेक्ट में, आपकी क्रेडिबिलिटी बहुत बढ़ जाती है। और जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर वाले आपने बात की है, अभी ESG जो गाइडलाइंस है, दे हैव बीन इम्प्रूव्ड। प्राइवेट सेक्टर इन्वेस्टर्स आर लुकिंग फॉर अपॉर्चुनिटीज फॉर ESG compliant investment opportunities. So I think the openings and prospects will be much higher now than perhaps they were before. Sorry, ma'am.
सर आपके बड़ी अच्छी प्रेजेंटेशन थी, बड़ी नॉलेजेबल प्रेजेंटेशन आपने माशाल्लाह दी। लेकिन मेरा एक क्वेश्चन है आपसे कि पाकिस्तान में अभी ग्रीन फाइनेंसिंग और क्लाइमेट फाइनेंसिंग में 250 US बिलियन से लेके 348 बिलियन तक पोटेंशियल मौजूद है। लेकिन पाकिस्तान में एक स्टडी कह रही है कि US $2 बिलियन हमारे पास मौजूद है, लेकिन हमारे पास ऐसे प्रोजेक्ट ही नहीं है जहां हम दहा सकें इस चीज़ को कि फंडिंग हमारे पास मौजूद है लेकिन हम इसको स्पेंड नहीं कर पा रहे। तो सर इस चीज़ के कुछ इसमें बैरियर्स उन्होंने आइडेंटिफाई किए हैं ड्यू टू इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, गवर्नमेंट स्ट्रक्चर्स, ठीक है, इस तरह की चीज़ें हैं। इस बैरियर्स को आप किस तरह ओवरकम वो कर सकते हैं, और किस तरह हम जैसे GCF है, वर्ल्ड बैंक है, ये लोग भी अब कंपेटिटिव एनवायरनमेंट वो पैदा हो चुका है दुनिया में, अब हमें फंडिंग के चांसेस बहुत कम हो जाएंगे पाकिस्तान को। मैं अपना इंट्रोडक्शन करवाता हूँ, डॉक्टर सैयद आसिम अली बुखारी मेरा नाम है। मैं यूनिट हेड ESG फ्रॉम बैंक ऑफ पंजाब। आई होल्ड अ PhD डिग्री इन ग्रीन बैंकिंग एंड ESG। सो सर आपसे थैंक यू।
Thank you for asking this question. And my favorite question also, because this is my the annual underspend in Pakistan is in excess of $2 billion underspent, which is more than the annual disbursement from IMF. Please remember that. Second point that we need to remember, there are over 1,000 projects approved by the Planning Commission but not implemented and postponed to the future years. It is called throw forward, quote unquote. And throw forward is to the tune of about 10 trillion rupees. And that means that even if for next 2 decades there are no new projects approved, this throw forward of 10 billion we cannot spend. And this is not a static price. Inflationary increase about 10% annually you can keep adding to the extent there is there. Therefore, if somebody tells you, and I know who is telling us these days, that Pakistan does not have a strong pipeline of bankable projects, they are, in my humble view, distracting us from the main core problem. The core problem is that the absorptive capacity or the spending capacity is very, very weak. I just told you it's $2 billion. That's not a small sum. अच्छा, अगर मेरे पास additional projects आ भी जाएं किसी जगह से, by way of example, if I cannot spend them, it adds to my cost of finance. And I want to give you some examples of this. According to World Bank, 55% of their portfolio is in overrun in time, not in dollars. Over $1 billion was twice used from the World Bank and another 900 billion from ADB to support in 2022 floods, 2010 floods, and the pandemic, which was underspent. Problem, my dear sir, is not absence of pipeline. There's no dearth of projects. The system is not there who can utilize it measurably, efficiently, purposefully. Example, अगर इन्हीं बॉन्ड्स की मैं बात कर रहा हूँ, अगर मेरे शहर इस तरह से अट्यून हो जाए, जैसे अहमदाबाद की एग्जांपल दी या मैंने थाईलैंड के बैंकॉक की एग्जांपल दी, तो who can stop city of Lahore getting an additional $1 billion a year? The problem is we don't have accounts officer in Lahore Municipal Corporation. Problem is they never gotten their accounts audited. The problem is they don't have a balance sheet. The problem is they don't have a list of the inventory of their assets. As a banker, you know, without having an inventory of your assets, your bank is nothing. That's a starting point. So, जो पाकिस्तान का रॉट है, वो पाइपलाइन के नहीं होने में नहीं है. That's not the case. GCF के एग्जाम्पल, ग्रीन क्लाइमेट फंड के एग्जाम्पल देना चाहता हूँ. Pakistan has not accessed a dime from GCF. The accreditation we have is of 3 non-governmental entities, JS Bank and NRSP and somebody else. The account number 1 में हुकूमत पाकिस्तान के पास एक पैसा भी नहीं जाता. But you have reminded me a question earlier. You have reminded me on air pollution. Because Lahore's favorite issue, and I think for your bank also. जो प्योरिटन है क्लाइमेट चेंज साइंस में, वो एयर पोल्यूशन को क्लाइमेट चेंज का इशू नहीं मानते, कहते हैं कि लाइफस्टाइल का इशू है. बट बिकॉज इट्स लिंक्ड विद फॉसिल फ्यूल, वी थिंक टेक इट एज, in my humble view, and I'm gonna, because you're Bank of Punjab, I'm gonna say it a little bit more exaggerated fashion. Of all the climate change problems, air pollution for Lahore is the easiest thing. And I want to explain to you why. Easiest. Not that it is very easy, easiest. 3 Chinese companies produced 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers और उनकी प्राइस जो है $250 से लेके $3,000 तक रेंज करती है. EV based, depending what quality you want. अगर आप उनकी पूरी प्रोडक्शन लाइन भी खरीद लें, Mexico, Singapore, and Mexico, Thailand, many other cities are doing that. तो आपके biggest polluters जो हैं वो 2-wheelers और 3-wheelers हैं. उनको आपने सिर्फ LCs देनी है किसी प्रोग्रेसिव इंस्टीट्यूशन लाइक बैंक ऑफ पंजाब टाइप में. उनके साथ जेवी करके उनकी प्रोडक्शन लाइन आप यहाँ पे खोल सकते हैं अगले 5-10 साल में. अगर रिक्शे, टैक्सी, रिक्शे और 2-wheelers एंड फिर शाहजोर वगैरह भी आ जाते हैं उसमें, अगर 50-70% ऑफ दैट फ्लीट इज रिप्लेस्ड, दैट्स डन. किसी चाइनीज कंपनी के साथ अभी आपने एग्रीमेंट किया है, मुझे योर कलीग वाज टेलिंग मी, एंड देयरफॉर द ईवी मार्केट का शेयर पाकिस्तान में, लाहौर में इतना इंक्रीज हो सकता है if we retire old fossil fuel based vehicles and increase the ratio of EVs coming 5 years, your emissions level will begin to go down. So the private sector and particularly financial institutions such as your bank are playing a role, will be playing a role, and I think in the coming years, within the next 5 years, we'll see pollution will not be one of your most serious issues.
At this point, I also want to, because we have other members from Bank of Punjab also present, Mr. Vikas Mahmood. I was wondering if you could maybe broadly comment on how you see these public sector banks, like the Bank of Punjab, supporting not just mitigation but also sustainable financing for climate resilient cities. So, if you could please broadly comment.
Before I would like to answer your question, I would like to express my gratitude for inviting for this insightful discussion. So, before giving the direct answer, I would like to share few statistics that World Bank has recently published. According to the World Bank report, by 2050, almost 70% of the population living in the globe will move to urban cities, and 7.7 million people that are already living in the urban vicinities, they will suffer from climatic catastrophes, and the amount of losses would exceed $314 billion per annum by 2030. And all those people will move to the poor category. So looking into those statistics, there is always a positive side to look at the things. The positive side is that the urban space for climate resilient, cities and infrastructure, the 60% of that demand which will be there by 2050 is yet to be built. So we have to put the things into the right way, and whenever there is a demand, the financial institutions look for the lucrative deals because they are usually established for profit making. But whenever there is a demand supply gap, that gap will provide the opportunities for financial inclusion, financial intermediation, and financial deepening. So this is where the financial institution and the commercial banks come into play. Now coming to your question, in Pakistan, if we look at the statistics, 30 to 40 billion dollars are required on per annum basis till 2030 to meet the climate related challenges. Contrary to this, I wonder that the federal budget of Pakistan for 2023 and 24 would hover around $51 billion. And out of that $51 billion, as a country, we have allocated only $21 million for the climate. Now, this is where we are standing, and there is a huge gap. To cover that gap, it's not possible for any of the government, particularly given the scenario right now for and the challenges we are facing on the economic front, that we can only put the government into play and they will be responsible for all the steps that are required to mitigate that gaps. For that to bridge to those gaps, there is a need for public private partnerships, as was rightly mentioned by Mr. Ali Tawqir Saab earlier. But looking from a different lens, rather than underrating our own self and putting some blames, I would like to share a few examples in the shape of successful transactions which the Bank of Punjab has done over the last 1 decade in collaboration with the various provincial governments, particularly because we are a province-based bank. We had a more collaboration with the government of Punjab. I would like to discuss the success story of Qaeda-Azam Solar. It's a 100 megawatt project, and when nobody was familiarized about the solar-based technology in Pakistan in 2014, we were the bank that has provided more than 12 billion rupees of financing to that project. And there was a lot of negative propagation and propaganda around that project, where the people used to say that it has 18.5% of capacity utilization factor and how they will succeed. Now today that project is up and running, that has paid off that 11.5 billion rupees of loans, and it has a guaranteed return on equity of 18%. And I'm the one who has underwritten that project. Other than that, That project paved the way for the clean energy into the country, and almost 11 projects of 50 megawatt each have followed through the private investors after the establishment of that Qaid-e-Azam solar power park. Another example where the social factor but the high credit risk was there, and the private banks were not willing to invest in those projects. The metro transit project, the rapid transit project, we have successfully financed the Lahore metro transit, the Multan metro transit, and the Peshawar based metro transit projects, and our money is returned as per the terms. So we have made money out of that, but the social factor was there. Similarly, Lahore Safe City project, maybe it would not make sense to any private commercial bank to fund to that, because we are standing and supporting the provincial government. We had financed that transaction and our money is back. So following the same model which is already existing there, now we need to channelize and we need to structure the transactions for climate resilient urban financing facilities. So it's the same way. It's just putting old wine in a new bottle. Uh, And then I would like to discuss the second part of the question, that what are the possible investment and financing vehicles that are available right now in Pakistan. Although a lot has been, already being discussed by Mr. Ali Taqir, that globally, we may consider issuance of green bonds, and 500 million euro green bonds were already issued by WAPDA in 2021. So the precedent transaction is always there. Recently, a green bond was issued by Karandaz and Pras Capital and Infrazaman in collaboration with each other. So the precedent is there. But now the world has moved into the, far ahead of the green bonds. The concept of municipal bonds and the resilient bonds are there. There is a concept of unblended financial facilities, and if we look into the possible avenues of collaboration in Pakistan, we have more than dozen of possible ways to execute those projects and to provide the financing. I would like to discuss, taking the benefit of this forum, a few of the mods. In Pakistan, the Dolman Group, the TPL Group, and the Arif Habib have already successfully concluded the transaction of REITs. So when we talk about the green infrastructures, the mega infrastructures, we can always, come up with the concept of green REITs. And then you will find that the investors across the globe who are looking for the green sustainable investments, they will come and they will put their money into those investments. It's just a time that we channelize those channels. Secondly, there is always, already a successful model in place where through public private partnership, the provincial government can provide the equity under the first model, and the financing would be given by the banks. The markup cost would be capitalized at the as a part of overall project financing. And because usually such a type of impact related, which have high impact projects, which usually fall under this category of climate resilient financing, the risk at the inception of the transaction is high. Once the project achieves the commercials operation, even the private sector public banks would ask the government that if they want to swap, we are willing to pay off the entire facility to the public bank, because now the risk has diluted. Secondly, there is a possibility where the private sponsor would come with the equity, and the government is required to make some legislation for the financing of those climate resilient projects, the mega projects, and they may offer a subsidy in the shape of markup servicing till that project achieves its commercial operation date. Because once the commercial operation have been achieved, the risk will go down, and there are a lot of people who are willing to invest in the low risk projects. So this is the second model. The third model, which is already available in Pakistan, is that we need to reset and rework with the State Bank of Pakistan in creating a localized green taxonomy for such projects. By doing this, we will create a space in the regulatory framework for sharing the risk return mechanism under the umbrella of State Bank of Pakistan, and The precedent is already there. The State Bank of Pakistan has already offered subsidized financing for the promotion of clean energy over the last 5 to 6 years, and trillions of rupees have been given for the promotion of solar and wind projects of up to 50 megawatts. So we can do this for the climate resilient financing as well. Then we can always explore the opportunities with international multilateral agencies. Like, if I like to highlight here, Bank of Punjab is the first bank in Pakistan that has successfully negotiated an on lending facility of 50 million euros with AFT France, and we have done it within a record time of 1 year. Now those banks who have been standing in a long queue with the GCF, they are still looking at their destiny whether their facility will be approved by the GCF or not. On the other side, taking a swift action, we got 50 million euros for the country for the promotion of green financing. So it is just a matter of putting and showcasing the right projects to the organizations like AFT, IFC, World Bank, and even Islamic Development Bank. They are looking for investing into such projects, but for that we need to have a troika of regulators, the commercial banks who have the relevant expertise of executing such high impactful transaction and social factors involved in those transactions. And the third one is the right structuring by the policymakers. If these three pillars will sit together, I think we have a lot of potential as a country to attract the foreign investment.
You have 20 in the pipe and you barely finish those 20, these 20 will have additional projects as well. So it's an area that will help our private sector grow. It will help us meet our infrastructural deficit in our small, medium, larger cities. It will also help us engage private sector in the implementation of NDC commitments, Paris Agreement, and create jobs and turn around the economy. I wouldn't have focused my presentation only on one option. Had I not been convinced that right now we have really marginalized our private sector, elbowed them out from the development sector in the country. They're not investing in anything if something government is not capitalizing on them. So, sir, you have given excellent examples. Your bank has prospered under Zafar Masood and some agreement that you recently had with China for production lines here of EVs. That was one of the arguments, one of the factors in my mind to think that in coming 5-7 years, we would begin to control our emissions issue in the city. So you have very good examples that you have given. There was a hand from that gentleman.
हेलो अच्छा अच्छा एक फॉलो क्वेश्चन था आई थिंक financial institutions have a very important role to play in green development. I think one of the biggest challenges I think we face here in Pakistan mobilizing private capital is when we look at green projects, they do not offer the returns that a normal project would normally provide, and thus private sector is not able to sort of raise debt or equity to finance that project. Some of the projects that were discussed were primarily solar, wind power projects. मेरा जो सवाल है वो ये है कि वो प्रोजेक्ट जो फाइनेंस हुए थे was the environmental and social benefits factor in to provide discounted or a blended form of financing to spur that sort of capital flow into these projects. I know State Bank की जो green banking guidelines थी उसके अंदर 6% मिल रहा था, वो तो सोलर के लिए स्पेसिफिक था, एंड आई थिंक वेंड भी उसमें काफी लगा. बट व्हाट अबाउट अदर यूज केसेस दैट फॉल आउटसाइड दैट रेमिट? आई थिंक टू if we really want to see private capital flow coming into these projects, we need to factor in, financial institutions need to figure out a way to sort of factor in the environmental and social gains so that it can be sort of the financing can be offered at an attractive rate. Pakistan, traditionally what has happened is these projects are seen more risky, and thus the interest rate actually goes further up, further reducing the opportunity for private sector to pick this up. I'm from WWF. We work with private sector, textiles sector के साथ in the decarbonization, and this is one of the recurring challenges we face. जो बड़ा आपका progressive industrialist है, they end up investing their own funds. But when you look at SMEs and tier 2 providers, that's where the big opportunity is, and that's where the big challenge lies. Regarding GCF, couple of people mentioned GCF as well. GCF has actually invested quite a lot in Pakistan. Recharge Pakistan, जो WWF का project है, I was leading that. GCF gave $78 million to WWF Pakistan. This is all grant money for green infrastructure and eco-based adaptation work to address flood risk. GCF ने सोलर के लिए GS बैंक को $25 मिलियन दिए, प्रोजेक्ट वो रनिंग में है. उसके अलावा उन्होंने FAO को दिया है, क्लाइमेट स्मार्ट एग्रीकल्चर का प्रोजेक्ट जो सदर्न पंजाब में हो रहा है. And they have recently awarded Climate Ventures और इसका क्या नाम है, Acumen Fund को भी on agri value chains. So those are interesting opportunities to see how those unfold in the coming days. I know Acumen Fund of Climate Ventures, they are still setting up the structure, but a lot of potential, but interested to learn how can financial institutions incorporate the environmental social gains and offset that for a lower or incentivize financing for these green projects. Thank you.
Sorry, you have a comment? Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, yeah. So my name is Bakhtiar. I also work at WWF. By training, I'm an urban economist. I used to work at CDPR as well for around 3 years. Before this, I was at the urban unit as well. So, cities are of particular interest to me. I'm going to pick up on what Daniel said earlier about creating those projects where the private sector has an interest, and also what Ali Saab said earlier about the land appreciation value that happens after infrastructure development. So what he's referring to is technically known as land value capture. Land value capture is a financial mechanism that is used in various ways and is considered the gold standard in cities like Singapore, in Tokyo, in London to finance large-scale public infrastructure. The idea being that whenever the government invests in certain forms of infrastructure, it generates benefits that are greater than those enjoyed by the direct users, but also generates costs that are greater than those that the system can recover from the direct users. We were all witness to the controversy around first the green BRT in Lahore, the orange line in Lahore, the Multan BRT, Peshawar BRT, the multiple lines in Karachi. Every single piece of infrastructure spending in Pakistan is heavily politicized, and a big reason for that is we haven't developed the financial mechanisms to sustainably finance those projects. Right? We can't really cross-subsidize everything. जो 18th Amendment और NFC अवार्ड के गिर्द भी जो कंट्रोवर्सी है कि रेवेन्यू वफाक कलेक्ट करती है, पंजाब गवर्नमेंट अपना 80% बजट उससे चलाती है, एंड वो पे डायरेक्टली क्रॉस सब्सिडाइज होता है लाहौर की ऑरेंज लाइन पे. You spend more than $1 billion on the orange line in the year following your deal with the IMF when you ask them for $6 billion, right? So you're spending $1 billion on a metro project when you went to the IMF for $6 billion, right? The math doesn't make sense. And the big reason that the math doesn't make sense is because we haven't developed the institutions, the regulatory structure, or the financial mechanisms to sustainably finance those investments, right? क्या हमारे पास पैसे हैं? I don't think there are any two opinions about the fact that Lahore cannot finance its own जो urban transport master plan है. I don't think anyone would disagree कि कराची के पास पैसे नहीं हैं, पेशावर के पास पैसे हैं. We just don't access those funds, right? जो हमने पिछले 10 सालों में कलमा चौक से लेके DHA वाले रूट पे जितने पैसे लगाए हैं, अभी भी लगा रहे हैं, more than 100 billion rupees, I think. Could we not have used those funds to expand the feeder routes for the metro bus? Could we have not used those funds to develop the blue line or the purple line? Why is it that according to the transport master plan, the orange line and the green line were supposed to have an intersection near GPO, but then that got shelved, and now someone gets off at GPO Chalk and then he walks to Lower Mall in front of the Secretariat to get onto the green line, right? So these these decisions that we make for political expediency, without really factoring that we haven't built the infrastructure, जो ecosystem की जो आप बात कर रहे हैं, जो private sector interests की बात जो पहले भी कर रहे थे, जो बैंक ऑफ पंजाब वाले जो हैं, जो वो भी बात कर रहे थे, the money is there, right? I don't think anyone disagree that we don't have the money. We do have the money. We just aren't utilizing it in the right way. Whenever, just my last point, on land value capture, we Orange Line may cut and cover, there were 2 stations that are underground. Those were major redevelopments. Those could have been sites of major urban regeneration, and we could have crowded in a lot of private sector investment and sold off the air rights around those stations, right? Why is it that the stations on the Orange Line and the Green Line look very dilapidated, haven't really generated any sort of urban regeneration around those stations? Why don't we think about forming PPPs around those station area redevelopments? The Anarkali station, for example, it could have been the site of a major regeneration project, the Kalma Chowk station on the Green Line. So I think we need to think much more innovatively about the institutional architecture that we need to have to channel in those funds, because the money is there. I don't think anyone would disagree that we don't have the money. We do.
Yes, thank you. I think we've come back again and again to the point about political economy driving a lot of the take-up of these kind of initiatives. I know we're almost out of time, but I do want to draw on the experiences of my academic colleagues. So we have Dr. Muhammad Ali Falak from UET, and we also have people from UMT, Drs. Farooq Beg and Omar Bhatti. All have expertise on regional planning, environmental sciences, and I was wondering if you could please provide your insights on, we've discussed on how municipal capacity building is needed. Where do you think we should be investing our resources as academics, but also, as policymakers, if we were to champion that cause, where should we focus on?
Focus areas should be that with respect to financing, we need to, like even in the previous session, I wanted to highlight that Dr. Umar has highlighted the gaps with respect to the architecture side. We need to rethink on those grounds. By profession, I'm an architect and having degrees in environment and the management sciences. What I believe is that we need to go back to the grassroots level. We need to understand what the people need. We need to go back to the places rather than evaluating, observing, or identifying the way the architecture has been portrayed around us. We need to revisit what we need now. The circumstances and the implications have changed. The challenges that we face today have not a kind of a precedented example for us in the history that we have evolved through. So we need to focus on the current challenges based on the current line of actions, and that has to be from the bottom towards the upside. It's not like somebody sitting in a big chair and a calibrated kind of an office makes a decision for the people who don't have the energy or the capacity to buy a 2.5 marla land. And apart from building it, that's another challenge. So as it was previously highlighted by Dr. Umar, I wanted to highlight that. Yes, the cooling loads have been there. There is a difference between the 33,000 megawatts challenge versus the 11,000 megawatts challenge. But the thing is this, we need to understand those people living in these areas. The gap of 10,000 of 10 million houses, it's still there. That was 2019. I'm talking of 2025. In a post-pandemic era, we need to evaluate our grounds again. We need to revisit what we are facing. And from an academics perspective, I think, or from a designer's perspective, I believe it has to be from the people side now. It's not from the perspective of like we need to identify what their needs are. Are they satisfied with what the things are happening around them or not? And as far as I can see, the gaps are like not, they are not getting bridged now. Yeah, breaching at the moment. And because of those, we need to go back to the people, and we need to start establishing those grounds. Like you go to those people who are unable to afford the house, and I'm talking a real one. So keeping those modalities in line, we have to rethink like in a very different way. And taking on board people means going back not only to the population but to grasp their needs and then revisit the policies and the matters in that way. Because being the fifth most vulnerable nation facing the climate change, one of the largest population on the planet Earth, and along with that, all of the discrepancies that we have because of the socio-economic decline, we are a kind of a case study the world probably hasn't seen before. And we have to build our solutions on our grounds. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
आई विल ऐड फर्दर ऑन इट कि हमें जो है वल्नरेबिलिटी के पर हमने बात की, वल्नरेबल स्पॉट्स हमें पता चल जाते हैं, फिर उस पर एक्शंस क्या लेना है, हाउ वी इन्वेस्ट ऑन बिहेवियरल चेंज इंटरवेंशंस, ठीक है, ताकि जो लो इनकम पीपल हैं उनको फ़ायदा हो सके. फॉर एग्जांपल अभी हमारे पास स्कीम है कि सोलर पावर पैनल्स जो हैं वो फ्री में दिए जा रहे हैं, ई बाइक्स भी फ्री में दी जा रही हैं. दोनों चीज़ें लो इनकम को पहुंच गई, उनके पास जो सिस्टम है वो एग्जिस्टिंग, उसको किस तरह से टैकल कर रहा है वी डोंट नो. वी आर अवेयर वर्ल्ड इज टॉकिंग अबाउट सोलर पैनल फायर, ठीक है, जो एक डायलेमा है वर्ल्ड वाइड नाउ. अगर यही लाहौर में होता है एक लो इनकम सोसाइटी के अंदर जहाँ पे डेंसिफिकेशन का इशू ऑलरेडी है, फायर अगर वहाँ पे एब्रप्ट होती है, व्हाट विल वी डू, आर वी प्रिपेयर फॉर दैट. तो रिस्पॉन्सिबल स्पेंडिंग ऑफ मनी is the need of time from the local government. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much, Mr. Ali. It was really enlightening to listen to you. I have just a couple of comments. I think there are a lot of fancy words being used here, but my suggestion would be like what you said, start small and simple. I remember my grandparents' homes, right? They used to have trees of different fruits, verandas, and without air condition, there was no heating load at that time, and they would have chickens and sustainability, whatever whatever the fancy words that we are using now, less carbon footprint, sustainability, um, net zero emissions, right? So probably a lot. I mean, it's amazing that you are coming with a lot of solutions for financing, but I think the immediate step for us should be that we start domestic and we start small, and we try to. There were also talks about behavioral change. So unless we do that as a society, I think any solution would not really work in that. And I'm really amazed how we shifted from being environmental friendly and sustainable living to the current situation where if you go around DHAs, for example, you would not understand that what is this architecture going on, that you have 18-foot tall windows installed in one canal house, right? That will actually make your house like an oven in summers. Okay, that will multiply the heat by many fold. It's just like you park your car under the scorching heat and you come back, you feel like you're sitting in an oven. So, and that too in a country where you don't have electricity, enough electricity, and then you pay so much bills from the money you don't have. So I don't know if it's a zero-sum game or it's a negative-sum game, because no one is seem to winning in this situation. Another thing I would say is that again, where the investment should go, I would I know multiple people who are thinking for the last 2-3 years whether they should install solar panels on the top of their roofs, because every other day you get a new policy for net metering. I don't know what the latest rate the government is offering now, and whether they encourage. So even as a doctor, I am confused whether the government is in favor of solar panels, whether they want to discourage it, whether they want to protect the IPPs, whether they want more consumers to have it, or whether there's some new policy. Like Mr. Umar also mentioned that according to him, it's not very helpful in dealing with the problem of energy consumption, when at the same time the entire world is talking about renewable resources and shifting towards. So the confusion, I think, it's the lethal thing you can have, right? You don't know what the shift is going to come tomorrow. Again, the investors are not happy. Those people who have been investing massive solar panels into the country, the consumers don't know what is happening. The people who spent huge amount on them last year, they are now eyeing that why the price is going so down and what's going to happen. The new technology is going to come over. So I think. And as far as academia, because I've come from, as I'm an assistant professor at UT Lahore, so I would say that we are trying to bridge this up. I'm involved in projects working on green buildings and bridging the gap between consumer and actual research. That, for example, one of the award-winning research we did is telling the common man how they can, how much finance they need to have in order to convert their conventional building into a green building. So that's all I would like to add here. But thank you so very much for making me a part of this
Ji, please.
discussion.
Thank you.
Ali has rightly pointed out. Basically, I would also add to what he said. We need to embed the vernacular architecture and planning into our modern structure. Actually, while he was saying it is, people-led, the client-led. Sometimes client is not that knowledgeable. We need to educate our clients first. While looking at the main boulevard, skyline, we would find, a myriad of like television screens with large glazing panels. Those are highly energy inefficient buildings. So we need to, think of the environment. Actually, what environment demands from us. This is the perspective. We need to educate people. We, as a professional, we need to think of the environment while developing, colonies like DHs with wider roads. We need to think again and again. The second thing is, recently I was reading some article published in some foreign press. They were, appreciating Pakistan private sector for installing like 25 gigawatt of rooftop solar panels. And government certainly doesn't know the amount of solar panels the private sector has installed. So whenever we talk about people in government, they say we cannot mobilize our local investment, or we are not just able to mobilize private sector. So this is again a learning example for them. They are actually just not aware of how to integrate this huge installation into their system. They want to save their the status quo they are maintaining. So that is their problem. They don't want to lose their control on power sector. So solar installations are not the problem actually. Their hold is the problem. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We are at time, but I just want to invite Mr. Sheikh to give some concluding remarks.
Ji, thank you. It was a wonderful opportunity. I want to thank you for your patience. I fully agree that we need to re-engineer our country, re-architect our country, our cities. See if we can run cities like companies with their balance sheet and use their assets to leverage investments. Instead of elbowing out partnership, private sector, see if we can partner with them. And I don't necessarily have big businesses in mind. I have smaller banks, relatively smaller banks like Bank of Punjab, and medium and small enterprises in mind, who can run the city economy and create jobs and livelihoods for people. I think important question is, we are not a very endowed country with human resources. So we have no option but to create an ecosystem like some other countries have done in the past. Ecosystem of institutions that forge partnerships with cities and governments to deliver analytics, analysis, databases, projections, modeling. Government cannot think, it can only deliver. Data sets will remain unused, unaccessed, unutilized, and corrupted. Corrupted in the sense of health. If it's not used, it will never improve. So that's where the ecosystem of partnerships with academia and think tanks and institutions come in. And none of us in academic settings is large enough to meet the demand. And there is no need to feel insecure and insulate ourselves, but to work cohesively as an ecosystem and engage with them. And government needs push. It's a rotten government system, sorry to say that. It cannot innovate. And way forward for climate resilience is only in innovation. And innovation is possible if we innovate the institutions that are supposed to spearhead us and lead us. And I think it has been extremely useful conversation. I enjoyed and benefited immensely. And now I have to run back on motorway.
Okay, thank you so much. On behalf of the organizers, I just want to thank all participants and discussants for giving their time and insights so generously. Tea is available, so please help yourself to some snacks, and thank you once again.